Hi, I'm Michael Forrester, and I am here to talk to you today about the fundamentals of cloud computing administration. This class is going to initially focus on the three ways that we can access cloud, and we're going to use AWS as an example. We're also going to talk about some of the AWS labs that we've included for your particular presentation today. So who am I, and why am I talking about how to become an adept at cloud computing administration and infrastructure administration? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, and then trust me, after this, it's going to be all about you and the information. So just so you know, I am a 20-year veteran inside the IT industry, and I've been working almost exclusively on cloud alone or cloud hybrid infrastructures pretty much for the last 10 years. So I've worked for small enterprises, I've worked for large enterprises, I've worked for startups, I've worked for medium-sized businesses, and I've held a variety of roles from hands-on engineer to architect to VP of operations and all the way back again. And I've also been an authorized Amazon technical instructor since about 2016. And I'm currently working on my Google authorized instructor as well. So I'd like to think that I've had some hands-on experience. I've done a lot of deployments at scale inside of AWS. So enough about me. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So our trajectory is that we're going to talk about the fundamentals of cloud computing administration. We're going to talk about how to get access, networking, storage, compute, which includes virtual machines and containers, and all the different flavors of serverless that can also be thrown in there. And then we're going to talk about a bunch of data stores. So that includes NoSQL, RDBMSs, graph databases, cache databases. We're going to talk about the general concepts behind those because all three cloud providers, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, the big three public cloud providers, all provide some level of insight and some level of engagement into those different types of data stores. We're also going to talk about a few DevOps behaviors because I just want you to be well armed for the best practices that you want to think of and consider as you implement these infrastructures. And you'll notice on the upper right-hand side, there are some cloud computing labs listed there. So identity and access management, VPCs, S3, we're going to talk about those in detail. And we're also going to add some labs for auditing and for automation and for elasticity so that you can reinforce those DevOps behaviors. Everything below that says bonus round labs on the lower right-hand side, those are all optional. Those are all extra just for you. So what are the three ways that we can access cloud? Well, starting from right to left, we're not going to go left to right. We're going to do different this time. Let's talk about the web first. So the console is the easiest way to visualize what you're doing in the web. And the best way to do that is for me to just show you. So, excuse me. Let's say that you were looking for the AWS console or Google console for that matter. You can just type in AWS console in your browser, and usually the first thing that comes up will actually be branded with the console URL that you're looking for. Now, I'm going to log back in just because I was already logged in, right? But here it's going to take you to the dashboard, and this is actually a skin for an API because really the API is the only way that you can access AWS, and this console is just, in a sense, a window into that API. So if we just pick a service, let's choose S3 for example, we can go in and you can see all of my different bucket names that I have for S3. Now, what about other ways of accessing? Well, let's go back to my three ways here for a second. If you go back to the three ways, we've looked at the web, and that's the web console. Over here in the middle with the purple box, we have via CLI or command line interface. Now, all the providers have their own flavor, but let me show you what that looks like as well. So I'm going to access this time what's called a Cloud 9 environment. And the Cloud 9 environment is interesting because it's an AWS way of creating a command line environment that you can play in. So here we are in my command line environment, and I'm going to show you that if you use this command called AWS, and if I show you the version of it, you'll see that I'm actually running 2.05 as my version of command line. That's the latest, by the way. It just came out. Very exciting, right? And if I run AWS S3LS, guess what it shows me? Those same buckets that we saw before. IT Amazonian, Performant Pro, we see test goats, right? Because that kind of stuck out a little bit. And here you'll see test goats, BAH admin, Spartan State. You'll see all the same ones that we saw before in the console. They're listed here as well. Why? Because they're all accessing the same API. Now, the last way of accessing is the API via SDK, which is the software development kit. Think of that as a set of pre-configured libraries that you can invoke in your code to be able to call the API on Amazon's backend. It's very useful because APIs give a kind of standard contractual way for us to interact with AWS or with Microsoft or with Google, right? It doesn't matter the cloud provider, but I'm talking about AWS today. And so it allows a standard contractual way so we can build web interfaces, so we can build command line tools. And in this case, we can actually have our applications talk directly. Now, I'm not necessarily going to run an example here, but I wanted you to see the actual file that you can use for the sample app that AWS publishes. And you'll see, if we go to the very top of this file, you'll see that this is published by AWS. It's importing a bunch of libraries. And then it's actually importing a client. It's creating an S3 client from the Boto3 library. And here you can create a bucket name. Here you can list the bucket name. Here you can upload some data. So it basically shows you how to create an S3 client using Python. And that's using the Boto3 SDK, which allows Python to talk through APIs to AWS. So those are the three ways of access: web console, command line interface, and using a software development kit that's native to your language, your development language. So, awesome. So let's talk about, by the way, the Quick Labs, because that's the other thing I wanted to show you, is not just the three ways you can access pretty much any cloud provider, but how these Quick Labs work. So here, I've preloaded Identity and Access Management Lab, and if you noticed, I clicked the Start button in the upper left-hand side. And what that does is it starts the timer. So this is a lab that's going to cover how to log in to AWS. And that little timer on the upper left-hand side, when that thing hits 0, this lab's going to delete itself. So when you start on one of these labs, you want to stay focused on this lab until you've finished it. Try not to take any breaks or walk away, because if you walk away and the timer hits 0, you're going to lose all your work and you'll have to start over. Now, the way these are structured while we're waiting for the lab to revision is that you have a lab overview that shows what the lab is about, the specific topics that are going to be covered, such as in this case, IAM users, IAM groups, how we apply policies, how do we find our sign-in URL. And then what happens is that it'll go through the different tasks that you're going to follow to actually execute the lab itself, to actually get to the point where you can do things properly. Now, knowing how this works, since I'm already logged in over here, I'm actually going to log off of my console, because in just a moment, when this turns green, when it basically says lab has been provisioned, it's going to offer me the ability to log into yet another console, which I'm actually going to use and take. So once it hits 0, which will be just a second here, I'm going to log into this lab, and I'll show you just logging into a different console, which is different than the one that I was in before. Same console, but just a different user. So should be any second now. Just know that we're going to be exploring users. We're going to add users to groups. And for our third task, we're going to sign in and test users. So here we go. So now it's switched from that blue provisioning box over to Open Console. So I'm going to click on that. Console is going to open. Now notice in the upper right-hand side, it says AWS student. That means it logged me in as an AWS student with Quick Labs. And so in this case, I would come here to the console, I would type in IAM, which is the service that we're going to be working for our lab, and it would take me straight in. And at that point in time, I'd be able to go to the lab instructions, starting with task 1, and I could start my lab. So I'm Michael Forrester. I've shown you the three ways through console, command line, and through SDK that you can actually access the AWS API. And I've shown you how the labs work for our all-day set of cloud computing labs, so that you can use Quick Labs to drive your expertise even higher. So I appreciate you listening and watching in, and wait for the next video. Thank you.